There are two kinds of people in this world. The first kind are those that are interrupted by notifications every 15 minutes. They consume short form content and have a very short attention span. They find reading books boring and are always looking for the next dopamine hit. These type of people have what I call a TikTok brain. They get bored easily with whatever they are doing. They're constantly chasing novelty, and because of this, they're never truly consistent at anything that they do. Then there is this second kind of person. He's the kind of man who has mastered the art of focusing deeply on things. He actually enjoys spending time reading. When people talk to him, he's actually present and not just lost in his own thoughts. These are the type of people who have what I call a deep mind. They don't chase novelty, they don't watch reels, they don't get bored with things, and are very consistent with whatever they do. Hi, my name is Jibreal Khan, and I help people go from having a TikTok brain to becoming someone with a deep mind. I've spent the last 6 years mastering the art of focus, and in this video, I'm going to share with you a few protocols that are just going to skyrocket your attention span. So let's get right into it. Back when I was a teenager, I kid you not, I couldn't study for more than 20 minutes. I would sit down all motivated, trying to ace the upcoming exam, but then a few minutes after that, I would start getting distracted by my own thoughts, or I would just find the material too boring to actually focus on. This was the situation in classrooms too. The teacher would be writing things on the board, she would be talking about algebra or calculus, and I would be just there looking at her physically, but mentally I had just zoned out. Naturally, when you're this kind of a kid who can't really focus on things, your life tends to be a bit of a mess. My grades were horrible, my assignments were due, my social skills were bad. Let's just say my childhood wasn't really a fun experience. Back then, my understanding of focus was that it is just something that is innate and it is just fixed. Some people are smart and have a good attention span, and some people are like me. They're idiots and have a pretty shitty attention span. But it is only now that I understand that your ability to focus is just like a muscle. And like a muscle, you can do things to grow it or shrink it. So I completed high school with very average grades. I think it was 75% or something. And then I enrolled into university. And this is where my journey to mastering the art of focus really began. When I entered university, I made a promise to myself that each and every day, I'm going to sit and try to focus on some of the study material. I fixed a time that each morning at 6 a.m., I'm going to get up, go to my desk, and try to work towards something. This had become a ritual for me. Granted, the first few times that I started doing this, the entire experience was very frustrating and kind of annoying. I was getting agitated because I couldn't really understand what I was trying to study. I had to reread the same paragraph over and over again, and I had to fight very hard to not get distracted by my own thoughts. And because it was such a nasty, frustrating experience, my study sessions usually lasted between 20 to 30 minutes. But after a week or two of doing this, I noticed something. I was now able to understand what I was studying far more easily. Things just began to make sense and I was able to connect the dots, and this felt so good, this feeling that I was able to understand complicated concepts, because I never experienced this throughout high school. Additionally, I realized that I was getting fewer and fewer distracting thoughts. Deeply focusing on things had now become an interesting activity to me, and because I found it fun, I was naturally doing it for longer now, like 40 to 60 minutes a day, first thing in the morning. You see, most of us grew up in the time of the digital revolution. You had Facebook and Instagram coming up, you had internet porn, online magazines, video games, and when you're a young adult, all these things are so fascinating. So you just let your mind run wild towards them. But what no one actually told you was that these things are so stimulating that consuming them on a regular basis is actually going to shrink your attention span. You are actually going to get bored of doing regular productive things. And this is exactly what had happened to the teenage me. Now that I was in university, I was a bit wiser and I started to realize that yeah, these things are not really good for me. I feel tired, sad, and kind of have this brain fog as soon as I'm done with doom scrolling. So I actively started cutting off these hyper-stimulating behaviors from my life. I would not have social media apps on my phone. I would not spend more time playing football or doing other physical things as opposed to watching YouTube videos. And all these tiny changes I made to my life to protect myself from hyper-stimulation were very helpful. Now that I wasn't being overstimulated, I now started finding reading interesting. I started to journal, I started to meditate, and these were the things that I previously just hated to do. With a combination of doing deep work each morning, plus cutting out hyper-stimulating pleasures and adding healthy habits like working out, meditating, read, I was able to get my attention span to 2.5 hours a day, which was pretty exciting to me. Being able to sit down with a stopwatch and then focus on something something for 2 hours. This was just revolutionary for someone who could barely sit and study for 20 minutes. But the journey does not just stop there. The biggest breakthrough came when I read this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. If you're a student or an engineer or anyone who uses his mind to make a living, then this book is a must read. One of the biggest lessons that I got from this book is that there are two broad categories of work. The first type of work is called shallow work, and this is the kind of work that doesn't really challenge you mentally. This could be things like organizing files, attending meetings, or responding to emails. This kind of work might be unavoidable or might make you feel like you're being productive, but this kind of work doesn't really grow you as a person because you don't really push yourself hard enough to acquire new skills. You're not going to suddenly become good at coding or learn how to do math because you started responding to emails. The second kind of work is called deep work. This is the type of work that requires all your attention. It actually pushes you cognitively. This could be things like writing an essay on a topic, learning math, programming, reading a book, or writing a script for a video. This kind of work really requires you to focus on the task, and this is also the kind of work that leads to your growth and acquisition of new skills, because you can only get good at programming if you've spent thousands of hours programming with focus. You can only get good at math if you're in a distraction-free environment, deeply focusing on math. Also, this kind of work that really makes you exercise your muscles of focus. With shallow work, you could probably be thinking of something else while organizing your files or responding to emails, so it does not really contribute to improving your focus. Once I understood this distinction between the two kinds of works and just how powerful deep work really is, how it leads to skill development, improvement in attention span, I decided that, you know what, most of my working hours need to be allocated to doing deep focused work, and only about 10 to 20% of my work time should be allocated to shallow work, because shallow work at times is unavoidable and you need to do some of it just to keep life floating. Another powerful principle that I learned from this book is that well-trained humans can do deep focused work for about 4 hours a day, and that fact just blew my mind, because at that moment I was already doing 2 hours a day, and just doing those 2 hours had completely changed my life. So I thought to myself that if I could train myself to focus up to 4 hours a day, just how much better my grades would be, just how much more reading I could do, just how much more I could learn about the world. It almost felt like this ability to focus 4 hours a day was a superpower and an unfair advantage that you have against the average person who barely does 1 hour of focused work. But just like you can't just show up to the gym and start deadlifting 500 pounds on the very first day, because if you do that, you're probably going to injure yourself. Just like that, you can't just show up on the first day and expect yourself to do 4 hours of deep focus work. You need to follow the principle of progressive overload. Here's what I recommend. Firstly, find your starting point. We all have different starting points depending on how you have been living your life so far. You could be someone like me from the past who can barely sit and focus for 20 minutes, or you could be someone who can actually sit down and, let's say, study for an hour. Once you have figured out this starting point that you're already comfortable with, your goal is to increase this number every few days by 10 to 20 minutes. Here is the entire process of progressively overloading for someone with a starting point of 1 hour. You are going to treat your deep work sessions almost like a workout for your focus. And just like a good training program has the specific reps and the specific sets, so will your deep work session. In the context of this deep work program, one set here represents the minutes of focus that you can generate in a single sitting without a break. I have found that the upper limits of a set should be between 60 to 90 minutes. I feel like if you try and focus longer than this in a single set, then you begin to get tired and begin to lose focus. So for the purpose of this example, all my sets are going to be under 60 minutes. The second thing that you need to keep in mind are rest intervals, because after each set, you need to take a break of 10 to 15 minutes, just the way that you would take a break after finishing a set at the gym. But just remember, if that break is shorter than 10 minutes, then you're not going to feel refreshed for the next set. And if that break is longer than 15 minutes, then you might just lose interest in the deep focus task that you're doing and might just get sucked into something else. I found that 10 to 15 minutes is the perfect duration. Also, whatever you do, bro, do not just start looking at small screens during your break. This break is there to rejuvenate your mind and help you relax, and small screens do the exact opposite. My personal favorite activity is just to go out for a walk, hear the birds chirp, see the trees, and this is the fastest way to rejuvenate your focus. So in the first week, you can see that on day 1, your starting point is 60 minutes. The next day, we are going to add an extra set of 10 minutes, which is a pretty good increment. You can add 20 minutes you want. Anything between 10 to 20 minutes is perfect. Then on day 3, we still maintain that effort, still getting our brain acclimated to this workload. And eventually, we keep repeating this process of adding minutes. Till on day 6, we are now doing 1 hour and 40 minutes of deep focus work. Also notice that I've taken 1 day off at the end of the week. I highly recommend that you at least take one day off in a week so you can actually recover for the next week's effort. Also notice that we are tracking the weekly volume of deep work that you're doing. Just how we are trying to keep an upper limit of 4 hours of work a day, we are also going to try and have a limit for the amount of deep focused work that we do in a week. I will get to that limit at a later point in the video. In week 2, notice that the starting point is now 1 hour and 40 minutes, and we're going to repeat the same procedure of adding 10 to 20 minutes every couple of days. That would mean now adding a third set. And on the final day of the week, you are going to work for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Week 3 is when things really begin to ramp up. You can see that you are now doing 4 sets of deep focus work. Also, just to be clear, it is not necessary for every set to be 60 minutes long. If you feel like you need a break after 40 or 50 minutes, then feel free to do so. You can then cover the leftover time by doing an extra shorter set. Week 4 is when you finally reach your peak deep work performance. Your mind and body are now trained to handle this load. Notice on day 6 how it says that you can either do your regular 4 hours of deep work, or you can take a half day, or you can even take a rest day. This actually depends from person to person and the kind of work that you're doing. If you feel that you work better, you feel better when you take 2 days off in a week, then do so. If you feel that you can perfectly handle 6 days of deep focus work, then do so. But remember, it is about the quality of work that you're doing and not just the quantity. Don't just push yourself just to add on numbers. These numbers are just vague guidelines, and at the end of the day, you need to listen to how your body feels. Now, coming back to the total weekly volume of deep work, I found that most people perform the best when they're in the 20 and 24-hour work range. Anything above that leads to a decline in performance. And I'm sure you hear about people who are working 70 hours a week, but how many of those hours are actually deep focused hours rather than just doing shallow work? Lastly, for week 5, 6, 7 and to infinity and beyond, you can stick to operating exactly the way that you operated in week 4. You now know your maximum limit for the day and your maximum limit for the week. Just make sure you operate under those limits to make this practice sustainable. You now have the blueprint to maximize your attention span and live a truly fulfilling life. But there's just one problem. In order to actually get the most out of this plan, you are going to have to be consistent. So make sure that you watch this video to learn how to do just that.